Hi everyone, Stathany Homtano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it is time for a review of the new Dope Body album, Homebody. This is a brand new album from once disbanded and now recollected Baltimore rock band Dope Body. It was back in 2016 when the band called it quits. It was a bitter end to what I saw as a vastly underrated and underappreciated discography. I mean, Natural History and Lifer alone made Dope Body one of the best noise rock bands of the 2010s in my view. The band finished things off on a somewhat abstract and risky note with 2015's Kunk, a relatively short project filled with these crushing, heavy, cyclical, abrasive songs separated by these experimental sound pieces. I even did an interview with the band around the time they released this LP where they revealed their intentions to drop records, maybe in quick succession, that were shorter, filled with strange, disjointed ideas, ran a bit like a mixtape, and even though there were some gaps on Kunk I would have loved to have heard filled, this was still a prospect I was excited to see come into fruition, but Dope Body called it quits before they were able to make good on their plans. But now the band is back and they have chosen to start making and releasing music again at a very odd time. It would seem they are embracing this with a consciously quarantine-angled project, Homebody. With track titles like Living Room and Hermit King, the band is keeping it a little lo-fi and close to home. Not only that, but it would seem the band has fully transitioned into this mixtape mindset they were evolving into around Kunk. Maybe the brittle sound quality and chaotic mixing helped get them in the mood, I don't know. Either way, the odd flow of abstract sound art and funky noise-psych ragers, as well as mutant pop rock, makes for a fun and messy listen. And as varied or as randomized as the sounds on this record seem to be, they all melt together into this uniformly weird, scuzzed out experience. The whole record kicks off with Johnny Bag of Smoke, which has a strong pulse to it thanks to some driving bass and drums, all of which is colored by the sunburnt guitar leads and whooshing shots of noise. I cannot describe what these sounds are, but they're on tempo and they are very shrill and add quite a bit of character to the mix. This is also just one example of many on this LP where you might get a hard rocking track and the band somehow is finding ways to throw in some extra layers of noise just to make things a bit more abrasive or left field or chaotic. The track is pretty catchy too, despite trying to overtly avoid doing a straightforward verse, chorus, verse type of structure. The song especially pops when the band starts to bring in these gnarly descending guitar chords just before giving way to this disorienting sound collage. I should also note that frontman Andrew Lauman is, on this track and many others here, sounding as expressive and as wild as ever. After this we have the song Sour Apple, which is much sweeter than the intro. Surprisingly, the hook on this one reminds me of like a solid piece of 90s radio pop rock. I don't know what you've done to me, but it tastes like sour apple. I don't know why, but this hook is something I can imagine like Jane's Addiction singing back in the day. But obviously it's being delivered now with a much more abrasive sound and lower fidelity mix. Also, the drummer's cymbals on this track just sound off like white noise, and I can't completely tell because the sound of this track is so cacophonous, but are there some hand drums in there somewhere? There's some extra rhythms in there just adding a bit more of a groove to it, and I love it. But still, that hook and the fuzzy sugar-coated guitar leads that color the background in a very busy way, they do a lot to sweeten the deal. Meanwhile, the track Fade to You is a bassy, compressed, thick, crushing, but also casual and somewhat nonchalant rocker with a very laid-back vocals. There's also something about the vocal line on this track, the chord progression, the bass too, that runs a little bluesy, but aesthetically it's so far removed from that sound I wouldn't necessarily call it a blues track. I guess if I had to compare this to anything, it sounds like a piece of music that arose from the swamp after like 25 years of there being toxic waste mercilessly dumped into it. After this point on the album is when all of the strange, abstract, instrumental bits start to work their way in, many of them just about a minute and change. We get a decent variety of sounds and textures coming out of them too. Some looping samples and ghostly vocal snippets on Lily, which kind of remind me of like 106.Never's Replica. The track Pepper presents a lot of prickly synthetics. Meanwhile, ESD is a dark ambient piece with a very vast atmosphere. There doesn't seem to be much method to the madness on these tracks, but nothing drags on for longer than it really needs to. And I suppose the tone of these pieces is as difficult to predict as the tone of the core songs themselves on the record. Since on one track you might get some writhing, blaring noise rock with a psychedelic slant delivered in 7/8 time, mind you. Then on another track, Living Room, we have bare naked rhythms that are backed with these throbbing synthetic bits of bass and very noisy guitars. Some vocal riffing as well, easily the most stark, skeletal, and maybe impromptu song on the entire record. There are some other hard-hitting highlights that I thought were worth making note of too, like the very loud, tense, and abrasive Hermit King, one of the most killer songs here. The robotic grooves of No Scene are pretty refreshing too. Then there's the closing track Redux, which is a huge, triumphant shot of noise and color. It's a short track, yes, but it does successfully bring together the album's love of ambience and also psych-leaning noise rock with a kind of druggy aesthetic to it. For a record that is this rough around the edges, it is a pretty grand closing. Even though this record is very noisy and maybe not as well produced as some of Dope Body's recent stuff, at least the stuff they were dropping just before they broke up, I really did enjoy this one. This has become, in a very short time, one of my favorite projects from them. Like with Kunk, there are still some elements that I would love to see smoothed over or worked in more creatively or expanded in a way that just leaves the tracks here feeling a bit more complete. But generally, I did love most of the tracks here, and I thought the band did a pretty great job of transitioning into this mixtape mindset they were beginning to work with on Kunk. What's even more impressive is that they pulled it off under the current conditions. Feeling a strong 7 to a light 8 on this one. Transition. Have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head is another video that you can check out. Hit that up or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Dope Body, forever.